Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our election coverage today. I'm here in the election centre in London, and Kirsty Wark is in Edinburgh, keeping an eye on things there. Lots of results to come in this afternoon. If you just joined us, you may not know that we've had a few results already, including a very big win for the Conservatives in Hartlepool, and we've seen the Prime Minister celebrating that by-election victory there, the first Conservative, the first female MP for Hartlepool in the constituency's history. All of that is coming up, and we'll be talking to the key players in the parties, asking them how their campaigns have actually turned out, and talking about the various factors in all of these campaigns. Lots of results to come.
Well, here at Holywood, it is the most important election since devolution in 1997. The very future of the Union could be at stake, with Nicola Sturgeon's Scottish National Party seeking a second referendum on independence. We've had our first few results. I mean, it's still too early to draw any firm conclusions, and the SNP has so far held all its seats, but there does seem to be some evidence of tactical voting among anti-independence supporters.
We are still waiting for most of our results in Wales because there's just one in so far. Labour's hold on power has been under pressure from the Conservatives and Plaid Cymru, but I'm already getting signals that that may not play out as some people had thought, so that's quite an exciting thing for us to be looking at in terms of the politics and the dynamics of it. Dozens of contests become mayor of England's cities and regions, including London, Manchester and Liverpool. Vicky is with me once again, Vicky Young, our Deputy Political Editor, to react to some of these results and to give us analysis as we go on. And Reeta's here at the touchscreen to bring us right up to date.
We've had 24 of the 140-odd English council results in, and the overall trend is of a strong Conservative surge forward against Labour, particularly in Leave voting areas, with one or two outliers, if you like. I'll be using the giant touchscreen to look at all the data behind those results. A lot of that to come this afternoon.
And our team of correspondents are in every count and every corner of England, Scotland and Wales to bring you every twist and turn of events. And Professor Sir John Curtis, as always, will be crunching the numbers and identifying the key political trends and making pithy observations. So join us as the drama of the election results unfold here on the BBC.
Yes, it's welcome from Kirsty and from me. And as you join us, we're getting another sight, really, of what the picture is in Scotland. And, of course, I need hardly tell you that the Scottish results are of prime importance today, given the potential for reshaping the union of the United Kingdom if those results go in a certain direction, of course, for the SNP. Dundee City West has just been declared, where the SNP are back there with a slight increase in their share of the vote. And John Curtis, who we'll talk to in a second, Kirsty, already saying that the SNP, in his view, so far, not putting in the kind of performance that will give them an overall majority in Parliament. It's early stage, I know, but that's John's sense of it.
That's John's sense of it. There are no big surprises so far in Scotland, except for the surprise in terms of the whole population, which is that the turnout is very, very high. The turnout both in all the postal voting, and indeed we saw these queues in various polling stations well after 10 o'clock last night, that indeed people have really, really engaged with this election. And whether it is about local issues or not, it is probably much more likely, as Nick Eardley, our political correspondent, said, to be much more a factor that the Constitution has been front and centre of this election, not least because the Conservatives wanted it to be so. And whether or not Boris Johnson feels energised by his results so far in England, it might increase his implacable opposition to allowing a second referendum even if there is a majority for parties supporting independence, primarily obviously the SNP and the Greens in Scotland. So if indeed the SNP and the Greens together make a majority, as is expected, we are in, not only just in Scotland, but in UK, for a constitutional argument which will last certainly over the next 2 years.
Indeed, Kirsty, thank you. And on that point, maybe I'll join Reeta with me here and to look at not just that Dundee City result, but some of the other results as well, Reeta. Shaping up here, I know there are 129 results expected, but let's have a look at what you've got.
Well, these are the latest results, and as Kirsty was saying, that, you know, so far there's not all that much change. They're all holds, as you can see. Aberdeen, Donside, Clydebank, SNP holds, Dundee City, as we heard, an SNP hold. But some of the interest is in the data behind the actual results. So if we just go into Clydebank here, just try that again. Here we go. So this is the SNP holding on to this seat. The SNP's Mary McNair with a majority of 5,200. And now this was an SNP gain from Labour in 2011, as you can see, and they've hung on to it in a perfectly healthy fashion. But let's just take a look at what's happened to the share of the vote. So this was the bold share, the SNP on 47, Labour on 33. But it's always the share change that's so interesting, isn't it? And look at that. Labour up 10 percentage points here in Clydebank. The SNP down a little, Conservatives down rather more. So that is an interesting result there. By contrast, if I take you back to the list, let's take a look at Dundee City West, which Kirsty was just talking about. Again, an SNP hold with a big majority for Joe Fitzpatrick there, nearly 13,000. Huge share of the vote, well over half of it, 62%. And he's added to the share of the vote for the SNP. And here in Dundee, the Labour share has gone down by 5%. So quite a mixed bag here so far in the Scottish parliamentary seats. But Huw, as you said, there's, you know, we've got a handful now, still quite a lot to go.
Reeta, indeed. And, you know, it's a fluid picture, isn't it? I was just telling you about John Curtis's advice a short while ago. Well, John's updated it now after Dundee City West that Reeta was just going through there as well. This, he says, is a somewhat more encouraging result for the SNP, with a 4-point increase. It's 3.8%, a 4-point increase in their support, and no sign of tactical switching, says John, from Conservatives to Labour, whose vote is down 5 points. Now, he says, this is the critical conclusion. If this result, as opposed to some of the others, if this result were to be replicated in the marginal seats that Labour are trying to defend, then the SNP would make some significant gains. So, you know, we're keeping a sharp eye on this because it really does depend on the individual circumstances here. So plenty for us to reflect on. Let's bring in Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor at Westminster. Laura, the Scottish picture we can come to in a moment. I can't help wondering what you made of the Boris Johnson flying visit to Hartlepool, complete with his inflatable twin.
Well, that's right, Huw, and I wonder if we can show our viewers those pictures again. Which other politician at the top of the political league can you imagine actually going along to pose next to a picture of themselves as an inflatable blimp? The answer, perhaps no surprise to anybody, is Boris Johnson. He's probably the only one who would dare to do some kind of feat like that. But goodness me, his party so far in this complicated set of elections has a lot to be happy about today. The top line and where he was for that visit is that win of a seat that's been Labour for decades, Hartlepool, where it's important not just because of that victory itself and the fact there'll be another Conservative MP on the backbenches, but about what it represents more broadly. A proxy, if you like, for what was the big question for the Tories going into this election. To what extent could they show that they were digging in, expanding their grab of areas that used to be red, turning them blue, and that whopping result where they really romped home in Hartlepool. They didn't just sneak it by any stretch of the imagination. That is more evidence for the Conservatives that they really are managing not just to sketch a new political map, but to draw those lines in bold. And we've seen that kind of story repeating in some council wins across England. And that provides some very tricky questions for the Labour Party today.
Laura, just coming in, and if I can just bring you back to that most recent Scottish result in Dundee West. As John Curtis said, that is a more significant result than we have had so far. And of course, this was the seat that delivered the biggest yes vote at 57% in the last Scottish independence referendum. Do you think that could prove to be a kind of early bellwether?
Well, it may well do so, Kirsty. I mean, we won't have the full set of Scottish results, I think, for at least another 24 hours. But we do have the opportunity today to look at some of those key contests where the results may well have been extremely tight and used as real signifiers as to whether or not the SNP is going to achieve the result that they've been dreaming of. And in case viewers haven't been following this that closely, for them, it's not all about reaching the magic number, but if they reach the magic number of 65 seats in the Holyrood Parliament, that gives them a majority on their own. And many of their supporters believe that gives them a very genuine, compelling mandate to ask for another independence referendum. There's been no question that they're going to end up over whether they'll end up being the biggest party or not, but it's really been in the margins. Will they have to rely on the support of others in order to have an overall majority at Holyrood, in which case you'd get politicians here in Westminster arguing, well, if they didn't win outright on their own, why should we listen to what they're asking for? But if they get to that magic number of 65, that these key seats give us such an indication of how they're getting there. That's why we're sort of obsessing about this detail and listening so carefully to what John Curtis's latest number crunching tells us. That really would make a big difference to what could be a very fraught political argument in the next few days.
Thanks very much indeed, Laura. Well, look, we can look more in detail at tactical voting in Scotland with David Wallace-Lockhart in Glasgow.
Kirsty, let's have a look at a couple of the results we've seen so far, starting in the northeast of Scotland and Aberdeen Donside. Now, the SNP have held this seat. Their majority is down slightly. Still a very healthy majority, it should be said, of over 9,000 votes. And Jackie Dunbar will be the new MSP for the area. That's an SNP hold. Turn up, like many constituencies we've seen so far, up quite considerably, 50 to 57%. Let's have a look at the changes in the vote share. And this is where things are a bit interesting in this seat. Big jump in the Conservative vote share. Now, what might be happening there, given that Labour and the Tories had around the same share of the vote in 2016, is potentially anti-independence voters in Aberdeen Donside have backed the party that came second last time, perhaps the best place to challenge the SNP party that opposes independence in the Tories, and that has resulted in a 6.2% swing from SNP to the Conservatives. Should stress, however, still a comfortable hold for the SNP. And if we go to the central belt of Scotland, we can have a look at Clydebank and Mulgai. Traditionally, this would have been a Labour stronghold, but now very comfortably SNP. But their majority is down again from around 8,500 in 2016 to just over 5,000. A new candidate this time, Mary McNair, she will be elected. And if we look at vote change again, this is once again where things get interesting. Labour are up 10%, Conservatives down quite a bit, SNP down slightly. So once again, could it be that voters in Clydebank and Mulgai who are anti-independence have backed the party tactically they think are best placed to take on the SNP? Swing from Conservative to Labour, 8.5%. We don't know if that's what's happening. Another seat, Dundee West, for example, has seen the SNP go up quite considerably with their vote share. But potentially that's something to keep an eye on. Should be mentioned, both these SNP candidates, new candidates, so perhaps not that incumbent advantage, and they still do have quite healthy majorities. Could be significant, though, in tighter seats.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm just thinking at this point, why don't we just make the point after we looked at Scotland there? We'll come back to some more of the Scottish results as they come in. Just make the point. I think it's important to say, you know, it's not all plain sailing for the Conservatives, despite their big win in Hartlepool. And we've noted some council results in England as well. We'll see how they do in parts of Wales. They did very well in Montgomery, as we saw earlier. But in Cambridgeshire, for example, it's not been such a good day for the Conservatives there. Let's just take a quick look at these figures that we've just had in, because they'll help us. And as you'll see, the Conservatives have lost control of Cambridgeshire Council. They're on 28, Lib Dems on 20, Labour on 9. Now, this area is normally a bit of a battle between the Lib Dems and the Conservatives. So let's look at the change. And there you have it. Lib Dems up 5 in an area that's been quite strong for the Lib Dems. And again, parts of Cambridge are very strong in favour of Remain when that referendum took place, given that we're still talking about the Brexit effect. Conservatives down 8. The share of the vote in Cambridgeshire for this local authority, 39 to the Tories, 28 to the Lib Dems, 19 to Labour. And a quick look at the change then, if we can. Conservatives down slightly, Lib Dems down slightly, Labour up slightly. The Greens up 5% in a county, again, where they have been really working extremely hard. So a 5% increase for them. And then we see the UKIP vote going down again. Interesting to see where that might have gone, actually, in this election. Anyway, our reporter, Ben Schofield, is in Cambridgeshire for us. And Ben, I've just gone through the figures there, but why don't you talk us through it and what happened to the Tories and the Lib Dems here?
Yeah, you're right, Huw. The city of Cambridge and this part of South Cambridgeshire does really like to buck the national trend. You mentioned the 2016 EU referendum. Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire both supporting strongly remaining within the European Union. Other parts of the county in the north of Cambridgeshire, up Fenland, backing leaving. So it is a tale of two halves, really. But added to that, we can now say that, while the Conservatives are making gains elsewhere in the country, it's a story of them losing seats here in Cambridgeshire. In 2017, they had 36 out of 61 seats, as you mentioned just now. They're now on 28, not enough to form a majority at County Hall. But for me, the story is in the south of the county, with the Liberal Democrats shoring up support that they first showed in big numbers in the 2019 local elections. They won the control of the district council there. They also made a very good showing, the Liberal Democrats, at the general election in 2019. Their candidate didn't win, but they certainly did better than they had in previous years. And in that part of the county, there were 6 seats that weren't contested by the Labour Party. Of those 6 seats, in 2017, 5 of them had been won by the Tories. Today, the Liberal Democrats swept all of those 6 seats, essentially being given an open door because they were able to take votes that may have otherwise gone to the Labour group. Now, I've spoken to leaders of both the Labour and Liberal Democrat groups locally. They say there wasn't anything such as a pact or any kind of organisation that went into that. The Labour leader said it was simply that the pandemic had made organising candidates and a party structure on the ground in South Cambridgeshire somewhat difficult. Make of that what you will. What happens here next? Well, could there be some kind of rainbow coalition between the Liberal Democrats, Labour and a handful of independent groups that have won seats? I'm sure talks have already started in earnest and parties will be strategising what happens next. Now, the leader of the Labour group said that she was extremely pleased with the result, excited, she said, for the council to be in no overall control. She's also Italian by heritage. She said she knows how fragile rainbow coalitions can be. I spoke to another councillor who said he was happy at the prospect of budget meetings that might go into the wee small hours as lines of budgets get argued about in order to form a majority.
Well, they've all got their things to look after and to look forward to. Ben, thank you so much. Ben Schofield there in Cambridge.
And we can go now to Dehenna Campbell, who is the Alexandra Palace in London, where they're counting for the London Mayor and the London Assembly. Dehenna, first of all, Sadiq Khan was saying, his people were saying last night that he was pretty sure that turnout was down. Is that your sense?
At the moment, only 7 constituencies of the 14 have their counts in progress. But what we've seen so far is that turnout has actually been higher than expected. So that's kind of gone against what we were hearing yesterday and in the days before that. We are starting to get an early picture as to what's happening in terms of who could become the next Mayor of London. And bearing in mind these are very early results, only 7 constituencies have their counts in progress. But it is looking like a 2-man race, a very close 2-man race between Labour's Sadiq Khan and the Conservative candidate Sean Bailey. Now, bearing in mind these are early results, results. Only 7 constituencies have their counts in action at the moment. In third place, it looks like it's Sian Berry from the Green Party on 8%, and in fourth, it's the Liberal Democrat candidate Louisa Porritt. Now, British mayors are elected using the supplementary voting system, which means the candidate who can score over 50% is automatically elected to become the next mayor of London. If that doesn't happen, it's the next 2 candidates with the highest votes, at this stage looking like Sadiq Khan and Shaun Bailey. That will mean they will then go on to the second round, and then people's second preference votes will be counted. At the moment, London Mayor job is being done by Sadiq Khan. He will be hoping to retain that seat. Labour has always been dominant in London for a number of reasons, bearing in mind that London is a lot younger, there are more graduates who work and live here, and of course it's more ethnically diverse. We have to take into account that this position of London Mayor is one of the most high profile in British politics, a really sought after position. If you think about the budget he or she will be managing over the next 3 years, £17 billion a year, and a constituency of more than 6 million voters. So all eyes will be watching very closely to find out what happens here over the next few hours. But at the moment, it is looking like it's a 2-man race between Labour's Sadiq Khan and the Conservative candidate Shaun Bailey. A final result we're expecting at the very, very earliest to happen tomorrow early afternoon.
Dehenna, thanks very much.
Right, so we've touched base with Cambridgeshire. We've had a word there with our correspondent, and Adina there telling us what the position in London is. So let's look at another important battleground, and that is Nottinghamshire in these English local authorities. And our correspondent there is Huw Caswell. Huw, just tell us first of all, what is at stake in Nottinghamshire, and what do you expect people to be looking out for in the next few hours?
Well, Huw, this is an authority that through its history has passed back and forth between Labour and Conservative several times, but in recent years in particular, Nottinghamshire has been a real bellwether area. Take 2017, for example, the last time there were county council elections here. The Conservatives came away from that as the biggest party, but short of an overall majority. They had to strike a deal with a smaller local party to form an administration. So for the Conservatives, this has just been about consolidating their position, and they felt very confident of doing that coming into this election. They very much feel like they're still riding the crest of a wave after a very, very successful 2019 general election, after which all of the county's MPs are Conservatives, and now we know that confidence was well founded. The first few results we had here were a steady trickle of holds for various parties, but then as the afternoon has progressed, the Conservative gains have been coming in thick and fast in areas like Gedling and Bassetlaw in the north of the county, some of them very, very significant indeed, particularly Worksop North. That was the seat of the long-standing Labour group leader Alan Rhodes here. He has lost that seat to the Conservatives. I think realistically, if Labour were holding out much hope at all of running this council, it would have probably been at the head of some sort of rainbow coalition, because one of the things that makes Nottinghamshire a little bit unique is that rather than there being just a sort of scattering of independent candidates across the county, there are instead not one but 2 organised groups of independents, both of which have done really rather well in recent elections. One of them was in fact the junior partner in the coalition of the last 4 years. So those independents only needed to maintain their recent success, maybe add 1 or 2 seats here or there, and that would have completely changed the maths in the tug of war between the larger parties. And it was entirely possible that we would have got to the end of today and still not known who was going to be running this council for the next 4 years. As it goes, it's a 66-seat council, so 34 is the magic number needed for overall control. And in the last half hour or hour or so, the Conservatives have ticked over past that 34-seat margin, and it looks very much like that blue wave, like elsewhere in the country, has not even yet reached the high water mark.
Interesting, Huw. Again, thank you so much, Huw Caswell, there for us with the latest on the picture in Nottinghamshire. Just a note about the position of Liverpool Mayor. There are mayoral contests going on, as we said to you, just city mayors and city regions. So when I talk about the Liverpool Mayor, I mean the Liverpool Council Mayor. This is not the city region mayor. And this is where we are on the first round. Now, Joanne Anderson on 38,958. And the independent Stephen Yip, he's the founder of a children's charity based in the city, in a strong second place. Let's go on to the next slide, because this will show you the share. Now, this is the reason we are concentrating here on this first round form of words there, because there's nobody getting 50%. Labour fell short of 50%. So what happens now is that there is a second round, because it needs to be a runoff between Joanne Anderson on 39% and Stephen Yip on 22%. That'll happen, and we'll get the result a bit later on. And then if we see the change on the first round share change, Labour down 14, so a real dip in support for Joanne Anderson there. And of course the independent up by 22%, a very strong performance by somebody with very strong local ties. So for the Liverpool mayor, not the city region mayor, the Liverpool mayor, they're going into another round because of that failure to get up to 50%. I'd like to bring in the Conservative MP, Dehenna Davidson, and just talk a little bit about the performance so far. Dehenna, thanks very much for joining us. It's just 5-3, and I know there's lots to come. And we've seen Boris Johnson in Hartlepool celebrating with your new MP there, your new colleague. What for you is behind that success? Because we've tried to unpick this several times today. Is it to do with that Brexit factor? Is it to do with the vaccine rollout? What is your understanding?
Well, Huw, I'd say it's kind of even simpler. And it's the fact that so many areas right across the Red Wall, Hartlepool included, have felt like they've been left behind for far too long by the Labour Party. So you add that into Brexit, the fact that on Brexit, the Labour Party wasn't necessarily reflective of a lot of these communities in terms of how the MPs were voting on Brexit. And then seeing that Brexit process delayed time and time again, alongside seeing Conservative MPs and mayors like Ben Houchen and Teesside getting elected and delivering on their promises, actually delivering for their local communities, I think has shown a lot of people who perhaps would never have considered voting Conservative before that actually Blue is the one for them.
What do you make of things like, for example, your gain in Nottinghamshire? Because we're just registering that the Nottinghamshire result is just in. A Conservative gain on that council, and we've seen a few of these so far. I'm just showing the figures, Dehenna. Just give me a second, and you're still on screen. 37 seats to the Tories, 15 to Labour, 13 to the Independents. And if we just look at the change from last time, just to see what's happened here, to allow the Conservatives to gain, up 6, Labour down 8. That's the big telling factor, isn't it? And the Independents up 2. So, OK, it's a very different area to Hartlepool, but are you saying it's the same kind of factor?
Well, certainly across the North East as a region, yes. We've seen incredible gains in Sunderland. We've seen us take control of Northumberland County Council. We've seen gains in South Tyneside. And just now at the count I'm at, we're already seeing gains in County Durham. Very much looking like it could be the time when Labour get knocked out of overall control of County Durham. So I know I've been asked so many times since I got elected whether or not 2019 was the high watermark for Conservative support. But I think what we're proving today is that certainly isn't the case. There are still an awful lot of people moving towards us, and long may that continue.
There was lots of coverage, as you know full well, in the weeks leading up to these elections about alleged sleaze and, questions about spending in Downing Street on refurbishing. The kind of allegations, let's face it, that would have caused a lot of trouble for some politicians in the past. Allegations of ministers, giving contracts to pals and all the rest of it. Did no one raise those with you on the doorstep? Were they just of no interest to people?
I can say in full honesty that throughout my time knocking on doors right across my constituency, but also in Hartlepool and making phone calls for other areas right across the country, none of this has been brought up to me a single time. I think I've had maybe 20 or 30 emails about it from constituents now, compared to about 120 about bees and pollination. So I think what it shows is that this just isn't cutting through, because when people are going into the polling stations deciding how they're going to vote, they're not really fussed about something that's happening in the Westminster bubble in our region. They're fussed about what's going to impact their lives, what's going to improve the lives of them, their families, their communities. And that's why people are voting for some of our really strong local Conservative candidates.
Dehenna, thank you so much for joining us, and it's good of you to give up your time today. Thank you.
And it's coming up to 3 o'clock, and that's time for the news with Jane Hill.
Thanks, Kirsty. Hello, good afternoon. Today's main stories. The Conservatives have taken the parliamentary seat of Hartlepool in what's being described as a shattering result for Labour. The new MP is Jill Mortimer, the first Conservative to represent the area since the constituency was created in 1974. The winnowing away of Labour votes was echoed elsewhere and has brought Sir Keir Starmer under new pressure. Our political correspondent Helen Catt has more.
They may well look pleased. The Prime Minister with the first Conservative MP for Hartlepool, Jill Mortimer, a historic result, the party says.
It's a mandate for us to continue to deliver, for not just for the people of Hartlepool, not just for the people of the North East, but across the whole of the country. And I think if there's a lesson out of this whole election campaign, the whole local election campaign across the whole of the UK, it's that the public want politicians to get on with focusing on their needs and their priorities.
It's another place which Mr Johnson has claimed in North East England, firming up the advances his party made at the general election, even if his effigy wasn't quite so stable. At a cafe in town, these voters said it was time for change.
I am all right with it, eh?
I am. I think because Labour just let you down.
Hope they can do some good.
Yeah. I don't mind Boris.
There's been plenty for his party to celebrate in English council results so far. A win in Northumberland. There was another in Nuneaton and Bedworth in Warwickshire. In Dudley in the West Midlands. And in Essex, they won Basildon and Harlow, which they took from Labour. Keir Starmer's party held some of their strongholds in Newcastle, Gateshead and Sunderland, although the Tories made inroads there. The Labour leader has not yet spoken, but his party has said it will listen and learn.
The question for us is, how do we make sure that we get heard? How do we make sure that our ideas are communicated in a positive and practical way, and that we are able to bring people with us, which quite clearly in the case of Hartlepool we haven't done. So yes, we have to ask ourselves that question. I think everybody understands the need for change, and that is where our focus should be.
Most results for England, councils, mayors and police and crime commissioners are still to come. In Scotland, the first result came in Orkney after the removal of an intruder, an expected hold for the Lib Dems. 5 holds too for the SNP, which hopes to secure a majority in the Scottish Parliament. Both those who are pro-independence and those against keeping a close eye on the ballots. The first result too for the Senedd in Wales, also a hold for the Conservatives in Montgomeryshire. But it's Labour who will hope to continue their run in power here. The pandemic has already made these elections unusual. With much more counting still to be done, it'll be some time before the full picture of results is clear. Helen Catt, BBC News.
Away from the election, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation has recommended that people under the age of 40 should be offered an alternative vaccine to the AstraZeneca jab after concerns about blood clots. The age threshold is being raised from 30 as a precautionary measure. We will find out later this afternoon how international travel will restart for England. Holidays abroad are currently banned, but a traffic light system of rules is due to take effect on the 17th of May, with countries classed as green, amber or red. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, is due to give a news conference announcing all the changes in the next couple of hours. You can see full coverage of that news conference beginning at 4:30 here on the BBC News channel. Police searching for the killer of Julia James, the police community support officer who was found dead near her home in Kent 10 days ago, have released a photograph of a man they'd like to speak to. Officers say this man is understood to have been in the Houchen area on the 28th of April, the day after Julia James was murdered. Police are appealing for the man or anyone who recognises him to contact them. Crime Stoppers has offered a £10,000 reward for information about the case. Well, in terms of the elections, results keep coming in, of course, in the coming days. And you can see continuous live coverage as they come in, along with the analysis of what it all means on the BBC News website or on the app. And that is it from me for now. Back to Elections 2021.
Hello, welcome back to Election 21 with myself and Huw. Lots more results coming in. And Huw, we're getting a sense of acceleration now.
Certainly are, Kirsty. And here's an interesting one that's just come in. This is Banff and Buchan, another of the Scottish constituencies, this one in the northeast. I'm told that this is actually probably the strongest Leave voting constituency in Scotland. But Banff and Buchan held by the Scottish National Party. But when I ask Reeta to take us through the figures, you'll see that the Conservatives will have something to celebrate, though they didn't take the seat. Reeta, didn't take us through it.
It's pretty dramatic, Huw. Take a look at these figures. The SNP's Karen Adam holds the seat for the SNP, but with a majority of 772. Now, it is the case that the Conservatives had been pushing hard in this seat. They halved the SNP majority here in 2016, although it's been SNP for so many elections. But let's have a look and see what's happened to the vote. So as you can see, Karen Adam just ahead of Mark Findlater for the Conservatives, just only 2 percentage points divide the two parties in terms of the share of the vote. But this is extraordinary, isn't it? Look at this, so dramatic. The SNP share of the vote down by 10% and the Conservatives up by 11%. Now, as Huw mentioned, this is thought to be the most Leave voting area of Scotland. Is that part of the reason for us seeing this particular pattern? Possibly, and that's a 10% swing from SNP to Conservative. I just wanted to show you one other result from Scotland, because this is quite a sort of outlier in a way. Possibly more typical is Perthshire North. Just in terms of the pattern of the results, where the SNP's John Swinney has held Perthshire North with a majority of 4,000. Just have a look and see what's happened to the vote here. You know, SNP up a little bit, Conservative up a little bit, Labour down a little bit. It's more that mixed bag of results that we are seeing in Scotland at the moment, but the one in Banff, certainly quite dramatic.
Thanks very much, Reeta. Just picking up on Banff and Buchan now with our correspondent Nick Eardley. I mean, Banff and Buchan, apart from the fact this is Alex Salmond territory, this has got a long SNP heritage, and they will not be happy with the digging in of the Tory vote.
It's a really significant result, because back in 2011, the SNP were winning close to 70% of the vote in Banff and Buchan. Now, as Reeta and Huw were both pointing out there, it was a strongly no voting area. Yeah. Back in the referendum in 2014. And one of the suggestions that some people are coming up with is that in those areas which were strongly against independence back in 2014, there is a big upsurge in the unionist vote behind a particular party. The key question is, over the next few hours, is whether that translates to any seats. But you take Banff and Buchan Coast, Banffshire and Buchan Coast, that was 17th on the Tories' target list. It's very low down.
That's really interesting. And the other thing about that is that actually Labour has had very little traction there for a long time. So that residual Labour vote, some of it is going in to shore up the Conservative vote.
And this is one of the areas where the increased turnout has really benefited the Conservatives.
But by and large, what's happened, and has happened over several elections in Scotland, is there's been a significant amount of tactical voting. And Scots seem to be quite good at tactical voting.
Yeah, absolutely. But still, the key question, I think, about how that tactical voting plays out is, where are the areas that it's actually going to make a difference? Yes. It's very close to making a difference there. A tiny majority
and that would have been an absolute shockwave. That would have been like our Hartlepool.
Would have been a huge result, absolutely massive. But the key question over the next wee while is, when you look at those seats which the Conservatives have held in the past, do they keep them? And, you know, you've got to then start looking at places like Angus, Murray, Perthshire North. Do they come in? Sorry, not Perthshire North, because we already had that, but Murray and Angus, do they come into
and actually, third on the SNP target is Ayr, which is a Conservative majority of 750. Now, by what we're hearing now and what we're seeing now, if that Labour vote, pro-union vote, coalesces around the Tories to shore it up, then the SNP will not take their third target of Ayr.
That's right. I have been asking about Ayr. I've been asking some people on the ground, none of whom are prepared to make a call on it at the moment, which suggests that it might be pretty close. It's also worth pointing out that the Tories have worked really hard on the northeast of Scotland in the last few years. They've done well in the northeast at general elections as well, and it could be that we are seeing different patterns in local areas. So Ayre's definitely one to watch.
So what we're going to see now here is that there's going to be certain strongholds where going forward, because obviously, you know, we've got another 5 years to go, but going forward in terms of shoring up support for the union, it's going to be targeted to particular areas. It's not going to be a blanket approach by the Conservatives.
I think that's absolutely right. And what you'll see over the next few hours, I think, is some areas where, you know, unionist parties have held on by the skin of their teeth in previous elections. They will end up with bigger majorities. The question, though, comes back to places like Dumbarton, which is, can the SNP infuse enough voters who might back independence there to get behind them to overturn those majorities?
Except that what we've got in Clywd was a shoring up of the Labour vote, and that might actually reflect on that neighbouring Dumbarton. Nick,
it's a confusing picture.
I love it. Nick, thank you.
Well, interesting thoughts there. I'm just wondering at this point whether we're in a position to talk to the newest MP in the House of Commons. And I'm delighted to say that we are, I think, aren't we? Jill Mortimer, who is the new Conservative MP for Hartlepool, has made history, the first female Conservative MP in Hartlepool, the first Conservative as well, and the first woman. I hope you don't mind me calling you Jill, but congratulations, Jill.
It's absolutely fine, Jill.
Well done. And I'm just going to ask you the obvious question. When you went around knocking on doors to the extent that you could because of the restrictions, what were people telling you? What were they saying when they were saying, maybe, I used to vote Labour, but I've now switched to the Conservatives? For what reason?
I was hearing that a lot, and I think what is happening here is people wanted change. They knew they'd been taken for granted for 57 years, and they wanted positive change.
Change in what sense, Jill? I mean, is this to do with change in terms of, you know, policy, national policy? Were they thinking in terms of big things like Brexit or the vaccine rollout, or were they thinking things far more locally?
I think the people up here knew that Boris Johnson delivered Brexit. That's what they wanted. He promised it and he delivered it. They've seen what's happened with the vaccine rollout, and they're very happy that the government's done a good job there. But I think more locally, they'd seen what's been going on with Ben in the Tees Valley Mayor, the Conservative Mayor, and other proactive Conservative MPs around the region, and what they've done to bring investment and jobs into their towns, and they wanted that here too.
It's interesting, isn't it, because some of your opponents have been saying very clearly that this amounts to some kind of pork barrel politics, in the sense that you vote for us and, you know, you get some goodies. Is that fair or not?
No, I think what happens is when you get a hard-working, proactive Conservative MP, we strive for change. We strive to bring in jobs and investment because we want to make people's lives better.
This is quite a blunt question, Jill, as well. How can people measure your success when it comes to the next election? What is the kind of yardstick that you're offering to the people in Hartlepool to see whether you've succeeded or failed in what you've set out to do?
Well, I think they'll be able to look around the town and see the differences that we start to make, and I'm hoping that will happen rather quickly. There's a £25 million Towns Fund grant that I'm going to be fighting for, so that we can sort out the Wesley Church in the middle of town, we can upgrade the Middleton Grange shopping centre, and we can connect this fantastic marina into the town.
Yeah. Jill, it's Kirsty here in Edinburgh. If I can just pick up on that. We saw you talking to Boris Johnson. You've just talked about wanting money for the Towns Fund. What was the nature of your conversation?
I'm sorry, I couldn't catch that.
I just wondered, you just talked to Huw about the fact that you're going to be fighting very hard for the Towns Fund. It seems to me that after this by-election victory, you might not have to fight too hard. But what was Boris Johnson's conversation with you before the rest of us media folk came in and took over? What was Boris Johnson saying to you?
I actually can't hear what you're saying. I'm really sorry.
Jill, are you still with me? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you now, yes.
Oh, good, good. Kirsty was just asking you what the Prime Minister was saying to you when he was chatting to you there earlier, when you had a little walk around. Before the Prime Minister started talking, what was your chat about?
Well, we were talking about being, you know, this is the, I think, 4th time the Prime Minister's been up. He can see all the missed opportunity here, as I can, and what a fantastic place Hartlepool is, and the lovely warm welcome that the people give him. And, you know, we're talking about what we can do to bring investment and jobs here.
Well, Jill Mortimer, many congratulations once again, and thanks for bearing with us with the sound. And we'll see you in the House of Commons and see how it goes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to Jill Mortimer, the first woman MP in Hartlepool and the first Conservative MP, so history being made in 2 ways. Let's talk a little more about the English councils. We talked about Nottinghamshire earlier, Cambridgeshire. Reeta, what's the update?
Well, lots of results coming in and some partial results as well, Huw, and more evidence of a bit of a mixed picture, particularly in some of the county councils, which were all last up for election in 2017. They include Essex, where you can see that they are still in the middle of counting, but we can tell you that it's a Conservative hold here. It's been Conservative for most of its history. But let's just take a little look at what's happened to the seat change. So as you can see, the Conservatives have lost 5 seats here in this election. And if I just also show you the share of the vote, that is the share of the vote at the moment. But the change in the share is the Conservatives down a little bit, 2 percentage points, and that's the Independents have gone ahead with 8 percentage points. And remember, we were talking about the 2 sets of elections that are going on in the English councils, some which were fought in 2016, some which were fought in 2017, and we did think that the 2017 councils, like Essex, we might see there the Conservatives slipping back a little bit, and certainly that does seem to be the case here. But, you know, it is a mixed bag, because let's take a look at Leicestershire. So, again, another county council. Again, fought in 2017. Now, they are still counting here, but similar to Essex, we know now that this is a Conservative hold. This was gained from no overall control by the Conservatives 20 years ago. I'll just talk you through the figures again. So the Conservatives have gained 4 seats here to the detriment of the Lib Dems and Labour. That is the share of the vote for the Conservatives, so well over half of the vote has gone Tory. But actually, the share change, they haven't actually advanced in Leicestershire. Haven't counted all the seats yet, so it might well be that that changes. But it's that same sort of pattern of the 2017 councils, perhaps not seeing that sort of real Tory advance that we've seen elsewhere. And interesting here, isn't it, that it's the UKIP vote has dropped a lot, but the Green vote has gone up. I want to show you 1 or 2 more on the list here, just to help you read this. The councils that are in pale pink here, they are still counting and not yet declared. And you can see the previous council here was Conservative and here was Labour. If we just take a look at Kent, for example. So they've still got quite some way to go. Only 28 out of the 81 seats have been declared. At the moment, Conservatives are on 22 and Labour on 4. But the Conservatives have lost a couple of seats there, and Labour have gained 3, the Greens 1. That is the share of the vote. And that's the share change again. Interesting, isn't it, to see it's Labour and the Greens particularly putting in a healthy performance here in Kent. But as I say, this is work in progress, and once we have a fuller declaration, we'll bring it to you.
Reeta, thank you very much. And we have got another result in from Scotland. The result is in Kilmarnock, and we can just take a quick look at that result. That's, it's certainly, well, we can't look at it now, but just let me tell you that it's coming now, that it's an SNP hold, Labour behind with 970, a big majority for the SNP, and then the Conservatives in 3rd place. The interesting thing on this, let's look at the share of the vote, and the SNP on 53%, 24% to Labour, 20% to Conservative. And let's look at that change, because this actually flies in the face of what we've been saying about coalescing around the best bet for the support of the union, because actually SNP are down 3, both Labour and Conservatives are up 1 percentage point. So there's no shift in terms of tactical voting maybe there. The SNP to Labour 1.9%. That's Kilmarnock, my hometown, has just declared. And now we can go to Professor Matthew Goodwin from the University of Kent, Professor of Politics there, and Kelly Beaver from Ipsos Mori. Good afternoon to both of you.
Hi, good afternoon.
First of all, hello. First of all, Kelly, what are people's preoccupations, do you think, in this election? Because, you know, obviously the swill of headlines over the last 3 weeks has been all about, for want of another word, sleaze, and actually the probity of the Prime Minister in particular. But what we're seeing so far is that that hasn't cut through. So what are people's preoccupations?
Sure. So the national level context has shifted quite a lot in the last few months, actually, as has the public mood. Back in December, January, people were feeling much more negative, not very optimistic about the economy or the future, or indeed government's performance. But with things like the vaccine programme kicking in very much at pace, and also government reopening society again, we have seen a real turning point in public opinion over the last 4 weeks. So I think what we're seeing playing out in the local elections at this point is a mix of that sort of really short-term, in-the-moment public mood, which is really on the up, both about general optimism, but also government competence, performance, very heavily linked to Brexit and the vaccine programme, but also this longer term trend that I'm sure Matthew will talk about, which has been seeded decades ago, which really pushes on the cultural values divide in society, and in particular in the red wall seats, which we've seen a decline over time on things like the class values divide, and that is much more where Labour have originally had their heartlands.
That's interesting. And Matthew, would that suggest also that Labour vote split in the sense that the people that perhaps see that their way to do better is under the Conservatives, which means that they're going to be the ones who are left behind, are perhaps going to feel that they're going to be really left behind?
Seeing a much broader realignment of British politics, and we're seeing voters that haven't usually voted for the Conservatives either coming out of apathy to do so or switching over from parties like the Brexit Party and to a lesser extent the Labour Party. And those are voters that, if we took a longer view over the last 50 years, have basically been left behind by the economic transformation of the country, and at the same time have found their voice excluded from many institutions, including that one institution that was founded to represent the working class, the Labour Party. We've never had fewer working class MPs in the Labour Party as we have today. And I think what we're seeing here, Kirsty, is that ongoing realignment that really kicked in the 2015-2016 period, really came to the surface in 2019 and is now clearly carrying on.
But that's interesting because it is, in a sense, the utter decline of the big manufacturing base, the utter decline of heavy industry, which then secured generation after generation of Labour vote. Then actually, as you say, Kelly, the cultural divide has changed. The loyalties are different. People feel more confident about, as it were, diverting from what the tradition was locally in that area, Kelly.
Yes, and Labour do have quite a challenge ahead of them, and going through quite a challenge, because they have to obviously appeal to that previously industrial base in those previous red wall seats, but also to appeal to the London cosmopolitan left, who are much more ethnically diverse. They're on, they're very, very different and very different culturally, and for a single party to appeal to both their traditional mainstay in that red wall area, but also that London cosmopolitan left. That is quite a challenge ahead of the Labour Party, and it's playing out very clearly in these elections.
Yeah. And Matthew, that is very stark, isn't it? Because what the expectation is that London will remain pretty firmly Labour, and indeed Andy Burnham's territory in Greater Manchester may do that too, though there may be changes there as well. And as you say, it's how Labour works out that conundrum.
Well, the basic problem that the Labour Party has is that it's stacking votes in areas where it doesn't need votes and losing votes in areas where it needs votes. And that's exemplified by Sadiq Khan winning, I suspect, quite well in London, while they're also losing Hartlepool. And here's the real kicker for Labour. You know, there is a debate within the party that, well, it should just give up on its industrial heartlands. It should turn its attention instead to the blue wall seats that are full of university graduates and middle-class professionals alongside London. The problem is there simply aren't enough of those seats for the Labour Party to win the next election. Keir Starmer is going to have to beat the swing that Clement Attlee achieved in 1945, beat the swing that Tony Blair achieved in 1997, and do that amid this culture divide that is really pulling apart what you might call cosmopolitans that are pro-EU, comfortable with immigration, and a more culturally conservative side of the country that wants to slow the pace of change a little bit and begin to rebuild a settlement that says a bit more for areas outside of London and a little bit less to areas inside of London. And that's the political equivalent, Kirsty, of climbing Mount Everest.
Yes, well, yes, exactly, 129 seats or whatever. But let me just stick very briefly with you on the question of the cultural divide. What do you make of the different situation now facing Labour in Scotland, Matthew?
Well, Scotland's fascinating because, in a way, it's the other side of the culture divide, and we've seen public opinion in Scotland, as Kelly and others have shown, becoming more liberal, becoming more progressive, if you like, becoming more strongly pro-EU since the referendum, and so Labour is getting hit on two sides, which is reflected in the fact that it's lost two red walls. It's lost the red wall in Scotland, and it's lost the red wall in Northern England. So Labour somewhere, somehow, has to repair these two red walls, because there is no path to power now for the Labour Party that does not run through one of them. It's somehow going to have to recover ground, and that is, I think, going to be made even more difficult today by the performance of the SNP.
Well, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you all. Just a friendly message to my compatriots in Wales, where they're in charge of these counts. You're letting me down rather badly with one result in out of 60 so far. And, you know, I just hope you can step on the gas a bit and give us a few more results. In the meantime, I'm getting some very good intelligence from my sources in different parties in Wales, and it's an interesting picture. So Labour telling me that they are very confident in Llanelli, which has been a very, very marginal seat between Labour and Plaid Cymru. It's been a real ding-dong battle there between these two parties, but Labour telling me they feel very confident there, as they do, according to one of my other sources, in the Rhondda. We'll see about that, because the Rhondda was taken by Plaid's leader, Leanne Wood, last time, from Labour. Will they reverse that? That's an intriguing prospect. It's a hammer and tongs battle, there's no question about that. The Vale of Glamorgan, we mentioned it earlier, in South Wales there, near Cardiff, where Labour's Jane Hutt has been hanging on against the Conservative challenge. My Conservative sources there telling me that they're not altogether confident there, but that could change. And Caerphilly, at this point, causing some concerns for Labour. That's another of these seats where Plaid and Conservatives, to some extent, have been challenging Labour. And Bridgend, now that's an interesting seat, not least because it's my birthplace, but Bridgend is interesting because it was the seat where Carwyn Jones, the former First Minister, was there for many years, really sort of dominated the seat. It's a big Labour seat, a high turnout, they're telling me, in Bridgend, and they think that Bridgend is looking OK for Labour, as opposed to the last election, when, of course, it was taken by the Conservatives. So a bit of a temperature gauge there on the Welsh scene, given that we've only had one result in so far. But look, I'm going to bring in the person who knows all about it, Sian Lloyd, who's keeping tabs on it all. Sian, what are they telling you, and can you offer us some results anytime soon?
Huw, I wish I could. Yeah, we're tapping our feet impatiently here in Wales at the moment because we have only got that one result in. But as you were alluding to, really, we are hearing different things from the counts, and Labour are at this moment saying that they're certainly hearing some positive things from the counts. Let's talk a little bit about Rhondda, shall we? Because Leanne Wood took that for Plaid Cymru in 2016. She was, of course, the leader of Plaid Plaid Cymru at that time. She had great recognition factor. She took it from Labour, and there was quite a shock, wasn't there, when the heavyweight Leighton Andrews was defeated there. We have heard that Leanne Wood has left the count there some time ago, and also we're hearing from others within Plaid Cymru that things are not looking good for them in Rhondda. So that is something that obviously we would want to be keeping a very close eye on. However, having said that, as you were saying, counting, it's not actually started properly in some of the seats here in Wales. Verification's still going on, and we're hearing that we're not actually going to hear what the result is in Rhondda most probably until about 5:30, 6 o'clock this evening.
Sian,
so some
I've got
time
to stop you there. I'm really sorry. We'll come back to you.
No problem.
Now, I'm afraid we just have to stop there because we can see Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, as is, arriving at the count at the Emirates Stadium in Glasgow. The first time we've seen Nicola Sturgeon today, and a few results to reflect on so far she has, Nick.
Yeah, I think she'll be happy with the picture in Glasgow so far. The Annisland vote, which just came in as a comfortable victory for her party.
Yeah, Glasgow Annisland, only Labour 2 percentage points up, but...
Yeah, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon's seat, the Southside seat, which is counting just now, is very comfortable. But Anis Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader, is taking the decision to stand there. He won't win it, but all the talk is that he will eat into her majority. It's a significant
listen to what she's got to say.
Is something that should delight every single party, regardless of the ultimate outcome of this election. It is a real victory for democracy and something that we should all take great heart from. I'm absolutely delighted.
How confident are you of getting a majority?
Look, a majority has always been a very, very long shot. The Holyrood system is a proportional representation system. In 2011, we effectively broke that system, so it would be good to do, but I have never taken that for granted. That has always been on a knife edge, a small number of votes and a small number of seats. So we'll wait and see how the votes pan out over today and tomorrow. But at this stage in the results, and there's a long, long way to go, I'm feeling extremely happy and extremely confident that we are on track in the SNP for a fourth consecutive election victory and to have the ability to form a government again. And that's an extraordinary achievement for any political party. And if that is how the results end and that is how the election turns out, then I'll be ready and eager to get back to work on behalf of the people of Scotland.
Here we are, just short and to the point, as ever. Short and to the point, but as ever, not overplaying her hand. I mean, I think that's the whole thing about Nicola Sturgeon, and that, of course, is a problem for her in the eyes of some nationalists, that she is actually a more cautious person as we've gone on. OK, we're in a particular position with the pandemic. You've got news.
Yeah, I've just been chatting to some people about Ayr, because the thing that's really going to matter this afternoon is those key target seats for the SNP. Ayr is one of them in the south of Scotland. It was a Tory majority of 750 last time. I'm hearing that it's really close. The Conservatives are worried. Now, there's still a bit to go there, but if the SNP could win that, then it's a big result.
Well, that is interesting, because if the SNP wins that and it's third on their target, they may win Edinburgh Central, as we expect. They'll win Edinburgh Central. You know, obviously Dumbarton's a different strike because we've got particular circumstances there, but actually they could actually take their top three targets. Now, in order to win a majority comfortably on their own, they should probably take 5 or 6, 4.
Yeah, I think they'd probably be looking at 3 or 4 because there is a knock-on effect in the Scottish system. You win Ayr, it's in the south of Scotland, you maybe lose a list seat. So this is why we're going to be here until the last minute working all of this out.
Exactly, but it's like a Rubik's Cube at the moment. But I mean, Nicola Sturgeon at the moment, waiting particularly on her own seat. And there's no doubt that as a leader, even a dent in that vote because of Anna Sarwar being this new leader in Labour, she won't like that.
I think that's true, and certainly at the start of the election campaign, partly because of the pandemic, but we saw Nicola Sturgeon in Glasgow Southside campaigning quite a lot. Clearly they wanted to make sure that their vote held up. I mean, Anna Sarwar will put on votes. It's a question of what happens to Nicola Sturgeon's vote as well, whether it's just a Labour increase and you get that sort of unionist vote coalescing around Anna Sarwar, or if it's eating into the majority.
Yeah. It's interesting because, of course, she said repeatedly that she will be, she said it there again, she'll be back at her work on Monday dealing with the pandemic, and that actually she's not prepared to discuss or move forward on the idea of a referendum until the recovery from the pandemic. But if indeed they do better today, the pressure will absolutely be on from all wings of the party to move ahead more aggressively, because Boris Johnson will certainly be moving much more aggressively the other way if he's taking heart from what's happening in England.
I think that's right, and I think what you'll hear from Nicola Sturgeon in the next couple of days is that she wants to focus on the pandemic. Someone in the party, someone very senior in the party, told me a couple of days ago, don't expect the next few months to be indie-tastic. They won't be, because they don't want to talk about it, not just because of the pandemic, but we've seen over the last few weeks that there are a lot of questions that don't have answers at the moment.
Well, we're going to go over to John Curtis now, because he's got news on this, but also of who the man who's turned out to be Nicola Sturgeon's nemesis, Alex Salmond. John.
We've got the first counts of the list vote. Remember, in Scotland, everybody had 2 votes, one for the constituency, which is what we've been hearing the results of so far, but they've also got a list vote. And we've got the list count for the Aberdeen-Donside constituency, which is in the northeast, which is where Alex Salmond was standing for his Alba party, but only on the list. And the truth is, it doesn't look very good for Mr Salmond, at least on this first result. The Alba list has just got 2% of the vote in Aberdeen-Donside. You need around 6% if you're likely to pick up a seat. So it may be, question mark, that Mr Salmond's return to Holyrood is not going to happen.
If indeed that is the case, when we see Alex Salmond there, then that'll be a great relief from Nicola Sturgeon, because there's no doubt that if Alex Salmond did return to Holywood, he'd be harrying her every turn. And in fact, Alex Salmond said something rather ominous in an article in the New Yorker recently. He says something like, if I'd wanted to destroy Nicola Sturgeon, it could have been done. So a big blow, because what is the avenue for Alex Salmond next if he doesn't return to the Scottish Parliament on the list, Nick?
It's a good question. I think it's probably the end of his political career if he doesn't manage to get back in this time. Probably needs about 15,000 votes overall in the northeast region. And as John says, if he's down on 2%, he's going to really struggle with it.
But here he set up the Alba party. We've had 2 Westminster SNP MPs defecting from the SNP to Alba. What will their purpose be?
And a number of councillors as well. Look, I mean, Kenny McCaskill and Neil Hanvey, the big question becomes, what do they do in Parliament? You know, do they become independents? Do they try and keep the party going? I mean, the suggestion from Mr Salmond over the last few days is, even if he didn't win, Alba would continue to be a party. He always said he wanted to build it over time.
But he only wants to build it, presumably, if he's at the head of it.
Well, yes, and if it's polling at 2% in an area like the North East, where Mr Salmond has a big personal following, it suggests that there isn't much to be had from it.
I wonder if John Curtis is still available. It'd be really interesting to speak to you, John, about what you think so far about what the SNP's performance has been. John?
Well, the truth is that so far the performance the SNP have been putting in isn't good enough, if it carries on like this, for them to get an overall majority, at least off the back of the winning 65 constituency seats. They don't need a dramatic increase in their support. 2 or 3 points up and 2 or 3 points down for their opponents would be enough. But so far at the moment, the SNP vote's running about a couple of points down on what it was in 2016. So we've already said, you know, the North East is not necessarily typical. The islands are not necessarily typical. But at the moment, at least, there aren't signs of the consistent progress on the kind of scale that the SNP need that would translate into an overall majority. But I guess at this point, one needs to repeat that oft-said thing at this time in the election. It's early days. We've only got 9 out of the 73 constituencies, so there's still plenty of room for that to be changed. But you notice that Miss Sturgeon, I thought, was relatively reticent in her remarks when you interviewed her. This was not somebody who was saying, I'm pretty darn sure that actually I'm going to make it. If anything, it seemed to be somebody who was indicating that perhaps she wasn't.
John, thank you.
So the First Minister there, and I'm sure we'll hear a little more about the developments in Scotland, given that the results are now starting to trickle in. We've got one in from Wales in Merthyr. I'll come to that in 1 second because it's a Labour hold, but we'll look at the figures. We're being told that there's possibly a recount in the Vale of Clywd. Now, this is a real battle between Conservative and Labour. It's been held by Labour, but the Conservatives have been surging ahead in this part of Wales, in this part of North East Wales, around the Wrexham area, just over the border from Chester, if you like. So my colleague Bethan Clement is there in the Vale of Clywd. Bethan, what's going on?
There is a recount underway here in the Vale of Clywd in Denbigh at the moment. Huw, it was always promising to be very close affair between Labour and the Conservatives. Dyffryn Clwyd has been held by Labour since devolution. Anne Jones in particular, she announced earlier this year that she was standing down. Jason McClellan is the candidate for Welsh Labour who will be hoping to succeed Anne Jones. Gareth Davies for the Welsh Tories. If we go back to 2016, there's only 768 the difference in the votes for Labour over Tories. It's been even closer in previous years. It's worth noticing as well, noting the importance of this constituency for both parties, with the Chancellor Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. Of course, they were here in this constituency only this week. It's very close, as we know, between Labour and the Tories. The recount, as I was saying, is underway. Hopefully we'll find out very soon. But whichever colour that rosette will be in Cardiff Bay at the end of this count, well, it's going to be a new face because, as we were saying, Anne Jones is stepping down.
Bethan, just to check, did you say the difference at the moment was 768?
Forgive me, that was back in 2016. That was the majority
right.
that Labour had over the Conservatives back in 2016. I was just referring to the fact that it's always been very close between Welsh Labour and the Welsh Tories here in Dyffryn Clwyd.
So did they give you any sense at all of what the reason for the recount was in terms of a margin? Was it much smaller than that?
We haven't been told actually how close it was. The initial indication that we had that things were going in favour of the Welsh Tories for Gareth Davies, the candidate here. We then found out, and one candidate actually suggested to us that at the time that it was going to a recount because things were so tight. We haven't been given an indication how close that count is yet, though.
OK, Bethan, thank you very much. Thanks for the update there. We'll be back when we get the declaration. OK, I mentioned that we've had a second result in from Wales, so that's 2 out of 60, 40 constituencies, 20 on the list. So the second constituency, Merthyr Tydfil, which has a long tradition of being a solid Labour constituency. But last time, a very big UKIP vote, around 20% or so. So, Rita, take us through the figures and let's see what happened.
Well, this is a result that Labour will be happy with. As you say, it is a solidly Labour constituency. One Keir Hardie was the MP here quite some time ago. But what's interesting is the swing towards Labour here. If we were just hearing a moment ago about a seat where the contest is between Labour and the Conservatives, here it was Clywd it was always going to be a long shot, but who were hoping perhaps to make some advance. But let me show you what's happened to the share of the vote here. Isn't that interesting? The Labour Party has put on 14% in terms of its share of the vote. Clywd has lost a little bit, and the UKIP vote, which was very big here last time round, has been redistributed. Looks as if that's to the benefit of Labour. So let's just take a look at the swing. So that is a swing of 7.4 from Clywd to Labour. Yeah. So an interesting result there, a good result for Labour. And one wonders if one can read across a little bit, because we were hearing a little bit earlier about Rhondda, where the sitting Clywd, where the Clywd MS Leanne Wood was thought to be in some danger there because of an advance by Labour. We haven't yet had the result there yet, but given this, it'll be very interesting to see if that same sort of pattern is replicated. But as soon as we know more, we will, of course, bring it to you.
Rita, thanks. I just noted, you may have mentioned it, apologies if you did, the turnout less than 35% in Merthyr. You know, the turnout for the Senedd elections in Wales is certainly has been significantly lower than general elections, but 35% is pretty low, and that's down on last time. The other thing, Reeta, I thought there was maybe because you showed this very clearly in your graph there with the changes. You know, the assumption is in so many areas that the UKIP vote, because we've seen it so many times in England, goes back to a kind of Conservative home. Here, we have Labour voters who were Brexit supporters, and they certainly voted Brexit, who are now returning to Labour, it seems, yes? And that's the pattern that you were illustrating.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, Huw, the screen here has suddenly taken us back to the London Assembly. I can't really tell you why, but no, that is absolutely the case. It did seem as if the UKIP vote, which has collapsed, just disappeared, had been distributed rather differently. Here we go. I'll get this back again now.
So with that in mind, Reeta, just as you got the latest results there, I might as well relay, because it's valuable for us, what Sir John Curtis is saying about Merthyr, given that we've just been going through the figures there. He says it's a very encouraging result for Labour, whose vote is up by 14 points, as Reeta showed us, in what was already a relatively safe Labour constituency. The outcome heavily affected by the collapse of UKIP, yes, as we saw, down 19 points. But this is a vote which was expected to swing to the Conservatives rather than to Labour. Well, there you go. That's a good point of debate, isn't it? It remains to be seen whether this pattern is replicated in the Welsh red wall seats in the North East, your Wrexhams, your Clywd, your Vale of Clywd and all the rest of it that we were discussing a short while ago. So, Reeta, thanks. We'll be back with that in a short while.
And now we can go to an unfolding story in Liverpool, and we're joined by Claire Hamilton, BBC Liverpool. A bit of an unusual situation on the mayoral first round vote.
Yes, this is the election of a new mayor of the city of Liverpool, and it's pretty confusing in Liverpool because there are three mayors who have the word Liverpool in the title. There's the Metro Mayor of the Liverpool City region, there's the Lord Mayor of Liverpool, and then there is the Mayor of the City of Liverpool, and that's the election that's taking place today. It's been a tumultuous few months in Liverpool with the previous Mayor, Joe Anderson, standing down following his arrest on conspiracy to commit bribery and witness intimidation. No one's been charged in connection with that, and he denies any wrongdoing, but he wasn't able to stand as Labour's candidate in this election. Then there was a contest to find a new candidate. The original shortlist of 3 women councillors was scrapped, and a new shortlist of 2 councillors was introduced. One of those, Joanne Anderson, no relation, was selected as the candidate. She's Labour's candidate today in the election, and she is now in a runoff contest with an independent candidate, Stephen Yip. Stephen Yip is a man who's run a charity in Liverpool for 40 years, but he calls himself an amateur in politics. He's not a politician, but he is standing on a platform of transparency, and it's an incredible story, really, because no one was people were expecting there to be a second preference, but in the previous 2 city mayor elections in Liverpool, the Labour candidate has won in the first round with over 50% of the votes, and obviously that hasn't happened this time, so we're going to second preferences.
Yes. Well, look at that. In the first round share, the independent candidate, Stephen Yip, up 22%. As you say, ahead of a charity, relatively unknown, but on that second preference, could we have an independent City of Liverpool mayor?
Well, it would be an amazing story if that was the case, but people here are telling me they think it's unlikely that that will happen, because with the second preferences, lots of people on the ground here in Liverpool say that they think the Green Party candidate, Tom Crone, will have picked up a huge amount of second preferences, and I think that Stephen Yip would have needed around 70% of people's second preference votes in order to beat Joanne Anderson in this contest. But Liverpool has been Labour dominated for a decade, so even just this shock to the system of not winning outright in the first round is going to be a shock for a local party that's still reeling from a government inspection which found aspects of the council's operations dysfunctional, and will see commissioners sent from Whitehall to sit alongside the new mayor in the Cunard building where the council sits, in a few weeks' time to oversee departments like highways, planning, regeneration. So even if Joanne Anderson, the Labour candidate, goes on to win, and most people expect that she will, this initial shock to the system, I think, will have several Labour members and councillors in the city quite concerned.
Thanks very much indeed.
Some more bad news for the Labour Party, this time in Sheffield. Let's have a look at the figures, because they have lost control of Sheffield Council. Let's have a look at the figures, because we're talking about 41 seats to Labour, 29 to the Lib Dems and 13 to the Greens. So what we're seeing here is a Lib Dem and Green attack on Labour. Let's look at the change. So Labour's still the biggest party, but they've gone down 8. The Greens up 5, done very well. Lib Dems up 3. Let's go to the Vale of Clywd declaration.
Dyffryn Clywd, Undatsgan, Vodka Vansum, Nifer, Pleidleisiau, Arofwyd, Borub, Ymgeisydd, Felanganlyn. I, Nicola Stubbins, Constituency Returning Officer for the Vale of Clywd constituency, declare that the total number of votes given to each candidate was as follows. Dane, Peter Christopher, Reform UK, 552. Davis, Gareth Lloyd, Welsh Conservative Party candidate, Ymgeisydd Plaid Geidwaddol Cymru, 10,792. Davis, Lisa Jane, Welsh Liberal Democrats, put recovery first. Democratiaid Rhyfrydol Cymru, Adfywio Flyn Oriaeth, 782. McClellan, Jason Matthew, Welsh Labour, Cladder Cymru, 10,426.
Very narrow win for the Conservatives.
Swingler Glen, Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales, 2,972. Thomas David Lee, Independent, 529. Feckley Riven Dadsgan Board. Therefore, I give public notice that Gareth Lloyd Davis, wedi iawn ethol fel aelod o Senedd a gyfer etholaeth Dyffryn Clywd, duly elected as the member of the Senedd for the Vale of Clywd constituency.
So there we have it, the announcement in Denbigh, the declaration there as they applaud the winner. It's Gareth Davis, a Conservative, who's been elected with a majority of 366. That's a very close-fought battle. There was a recount there, as we heard earlier on, with Jason McClellan for Labour on 10,426, and Plaid way behind with the Lib Dems too. Now, that's significant because at the general election in 2019, that seat went to the Conservatives, and the same has happened again. This seat now for the Senedd has been in Labour hands since 1999, when the then Assembly was created. So here we have it. Albeit, a very tightly fought race, but we have the Conservatives again making very strong inroads into that Labour territory in North East Wales. So bad news for Labour there, and bad news in Sheffield, I was about to tell you earlier, where they'd lost control of the council there to no overall control, but it's the Lib Dems and Greens who are coming along there. So what I'd like to do to respond to those two bits of news is bring in Bridget Phillipson, who's Shadow Treasury Secretary, Labour MP in Sunderland. Bridget, thank you very much for joining us and for waiting to talk to us. So disappointing news for you in Sheffield, but I imagine maybe even more disappointing in North East Wales, an area where you've been so strong in the past, to lose out very narrowly to the Conservatives?
Look, there's no escaping the fact that this has been a very difficult set of elections for us. And the message that, we're getting from voters is absolutely clear that we've got to change. We have started that process of change under Keir Starmer's new leadership. We've got a long way to go in winning back voters' trust. And, we have to increase the pace and the scale of that change in order to earn that back. We did suffer a devastating result back in 2019, and it will take time to earn that trust back. But I'm not going to make any excuses. There are other factors you could talk about, but I'm just focused on making sure that we get the Labour Party back into a strong position once again, so that we speak for the whole country, and that once again we can start that process of earning voters' trust once more.
Just bear with us, if you would, Bridget. I'm just going to show the result from East Lothian, which I'm afraid, from your point of view, is not good either. If you have a look at this, this is the SNP gaining a seat from Labour in East Lothian for the Scottish Parliament, a swing to the SNP of 2.8%. The turnout, a high turnout of 68.9%. That's pretty much a significant rise from last time, a majority of 1,179. Quick look at the share, 39% to the SNP, 37% to Labour, the Tories on 21. Let's have a look at the change. And there we have the SNP going up 4, Labour just down 1 percentage point, and the Tories down 3. So a swing there, as I said, from the Labour Party to the SNP. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, Bridget, but, that's yet another element. That's in Scotland there. I mentioned a Welsh result, an English result in Sheffield, and now a Scottish result. Do you detect any theme here, other than, as you say, the party needs to change even more? And if it does change, what are the precise, visible things that we will see if the party changes?
Look, it's bitterly disappointing, and I can't see the result on the screen, sadly, but it sounds like quite a close result, but disappointing all the same. I think right across the UK, on doorsteps up and down the country, and certainly what I've heard from voters is that the anger that was there back in 2019 is gone. So I'm not being chased off doors in the way that I was back then. That palpable sense of anger that people felt with the Labour Party isn't there in the same way. But that's not the same thing as having persuaded people that they can vote for us once more, and that we've earned back their trust. So we have a long and difficult journey ahead of us. And I think that change has to be in focusing on how we build a better Britain and the future of our country. So, the Labour Party succeeds and wins elections when we have a hopeful and optimistic vision about the kind of country that we want to build. And for me, that involves making sure that every child in every part of our country has the opportunity to get on in life, that people have good, secure and decent, well-paid jobs. And that's the kind of, they're the kind of areas we'll be talking about.
Bridget, Vicky Young is with me, and she'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, Bridget, are you clear what the strategy is? A lot of people will say, yes, Keir Starmer's only been leader for a year. There's been a pandemic. It's been difficult to get the message across. But you've now got a problem, haven't you, where you're having a difficult night of election results. Lots of your MPs saying you're being rejected in large parts of the United Kingdom. Some are saying bring back socialism. Others saying, actually, no, Keir Starmer's got to ditch all that and do something different. Are you clear what the message is going to be from now on in?
Of course, the pandemic, COVID, all of that has had an impact, but I'm not going to come on here and pretend for 1 minute that the problems within the Labour Party don't run a lot deeper than that. As I say, I think there is a sense that people are willing to, talk to us now. They're much warmer on the doorsteps than they were, but we've got a long, long journey ahead in winning back voters' trust. That breach that we had back in 2019, but the problems that run a lot deeper. We've lost 4 general elections on the bounce now. We haven't won a general election since 2005. And as a party, we absolutely have to change. And that has to mean that we're rooted in the concerns that voters have, rooted in their lives and their hopes and aspirations for the future. So whether that's owning your own home or your children having, a better life than you have enjoyed, I think all of that is, Labour having a hopeful vision about the kind of Britain that we can build, but also being, I think, proud and confident about our country. We are a great country, a great place to live. I just happen to think we could be better still, and that, it's for government to give people greater opportunities and control and choice in their own lives that I think all too often aren't there. But, you know, the Conservatives have persuaded people still that to stick with them through this time. We've got a job ahead of us, but I'm confident that, you know, Keir recognises the challenges that we face and he's committed to fixing them.
Bridget, Kirsty here in Edinburgh, if I can just ask you a quick couple of questions. It will not have escaped your attention that yours is the second constituency with a majority smaller than Hartlepool. When you come down, first of all, it's Walsall South, then it's yours. Now, you had a Brexit vote of 6,000 in your constituency. Your majority was 3,000. You could be going the way of Hartlepool.
I'm not sure the analysis is that straightforward, but I take absolutely nothing for granted. That's why I'm out all the time talking to my voters and making sure that I'm listening to what they've got to say. And I heard what they told me in 2019. I absolutely get it. We've got to change as a party. We've got to be different. We don't have the right to any of these votes. None of us we don't own working class votes in places like Sunderland. We've got to earn that trust and earn that right to be heard and to win back those votes once again. You know, I don't doubt that for one moment.
Right. I want to take you on to your boss, Annalise Dawes. There's heavy briefing against her at the moment and the talk that Keir Starmer will reshuffle his cabinet and move Annalise Dawes, your boss. Would that be a mistake?
I think Annalisa is doing a brilliant job as Shadow Chancellor and will be a fantastic Chancellor. I mean, these are all decisions for the leader, of course, but I don't think, you know, I think our problems in the party are run a lot deeper. You know, as I say, we've lost 4 elections on the bounce now. You know, the problems in connecting with voters, in making sure that we're in touch with their concerns. I think that's where the real challenge lies for the Labour Party.
Thanks very much indeed, Bridget Phillipson, for joining us. Coming round to Nick Eardley now, and on that stunning result in East Lothian, it was 6th on the SNP target, and they've done it.
Yeah, they have. I'd suggest that's the first big result of the Scottish election. That's a seat that had been Labour in the Scottish Parliament since it was created, so back in 1999. It is one that Labour were fairly confident earlier in the week of holding on to. Yeah. We've spoken all afternoon about the SNP turnout versus tactical voting. This is somewhere where the SNP have shown that if they get their vote out, they can win in places they've not won before.
Ian Gray too, because what that means, of course, is that Ian Gray was a well-kent face in the Labour Party, and that recognition has completely gone as Ian Gray has retired.
Yeah, and Martin Whitfield had been the MP there before, so he was a fairly known face in the area as well. The SNP were slightly nervous because the MP now is Kenny McCaskill, who defected to Alex Hammond's new Alba party. Some of the constituency were, maybe he will come back, but some of the constituency were less than impressed. I just need to point out, however, that the system used here means that that's not necessarily a net gain for the SNP.
Because it'll hit them on the list.
The South of Scotland list, they have 3 MSPs at the moment, and this potentially knocks them down to 2. So it's a big result because it shows the SNP, if they get the vote out, can win in places they've not won before, even though they've been in government for 14 years. But it doesn't at the moment necessarily mean that they're up to the 64 mark and closer to the majority.
Just very quickly on that, maybe there's a bit of tactical voting there too, that actually they don't like the fact that Kenny McCaskill is no longer in the SNP, he's moved to Alba, and so they actually want to make sure they've got an SNP MSP in that territory.
Yeah, quite possibly that as well. But yeah, it's a big moment in this race, and if we see Ayr go a similar way in the next couple of hours, which seems to be very close, SNP are talking
we're just going straight to Sir Keir Starmer.
But we haven't set out a strong enough case to the country. Very often we've been talking to ourselves instead of to the country, and we've lost the trust of working people, particularly in places like Hartlepool. I intend to do whatever is necessary to fix that.
What will you do? Because some people in your party are going to say you need to move more towards the Jeremy Corbyn agenda, others away from it.
This is not a question of left or right. It's a question of whether we're facing the country. We have changed as a party, but we've not made a strong enough case to the country. We've lost that connection, that trust, and I intend to rebuild that and do whatever is necessary to rebuild that trust.
But what does change mean in, say, policy terms?
It means stopping as a party quarrelling amongst ourselves, looking internally and facing the country and setting out that bold vision for a better Britain and changing the things that need changing.
What is that vision?
That is the change that I will bring about.
Len McCluskey, Unite General Secretary, says people don't know what you stand for. What is that vision?
Our vision is of a country that ends the injustice and inequality that millions of people face every day. But fundamentally, we have to show that we are facing the country, that we've learnt the lessons of this bitterly disappointing set of results.
You say you take personal responsibility for the results. Are you up to the job of Labour Party leader?
Yes, and I intend not only to take responsibility for the results, but to take responsibility for fixing things. And I will set out what change is needed over the next few days, but I'm absolutely clear in my mind and absolutely determined to do whatever is necessary to fix things and to make sure we can make that case to the country in a compelling way.
What are you going to change over the next few days? What are you referring to?
I will set out what we need to do to reconnect the Labour Party to the voters that have cast their verdict on us last night, particularly in places like Hartlepool. We have changed as a party. We have changed as a party, but we need to go further and we need to set out that strong case to the country, and we have not done that.
So you're going to set out a new policy agenda, is that what you're saying?
I am going to set out a strong case to the country, learn the lessons of the elections that have come in so far, and accept that we must reconnect and rebuild trust with working people, particularly in places like Hartlepool.
Can you give us any indication of what it is you're going to be
Well, I'm not going to
about?
set out a policy agenda in this interview, but I'm going to set out how we reconnect and rebuild that trust.
Are you going to reshuffle your top team?
We've lost 4 general elections. We've just had a bitterly disappointing set of results last night. This goes way beyond a reshuffle or personalities. It's about focusing the Labour Party on the country and making sure that we close the gap between the Labour Party and working people.
Sorry, I'm not clear though. Are you going to reshuffle your top team?
We have lost
Yes
4.
or no?
We have lost 4 general elections in a row. We've had bitterly disappointing results last night. This goes way beyond a reshuffle, goes way beyond personalities. It goes to the core issue of whether the Labour Party is talking to itself or talking to the country.
Sorry, Sir Keir, yes or no, are you going to reshuffle your top team?
I've said that, as far as I'm concerned, we've been losing elections for 10 or 11 years. This is much more fundamental than a reshuffle or personalities.
OK, well, I'm not clear what the answer is in that case. But just finally, is the Labour Party facing an existential crisis?
No. But the Labour Party has to rise to the challenge of reconnecting with working people. We were set up to represent working people. We need to reconnect, rebuild that trust. And that means learning the lessons of the results that are in so far and putting a much stronger and bolder case to the country.
But sorry, Sir Keir, you're not setting out your new policy agenda or what might change precisely. You're not saying whether you're going to reshuffle your top team. Are you really going to deliver change?
Yes, we have already changed as a party. We need to go further. And in particular, we need to set out a stronger case about the future of our country to the country and face the electorate, not internally to the party.
You happy? We can keep going if you like.
No, that's fine.
Well, that was Sir Keir Starmer looking, I think it's fair to say, a bit shocked by the results and maybe a bit stressed as well, but really underlining that, this isn't a case of just reshuffling the team, although I think it's quite clear that that's what he's planning, but going beyond that. And he's really thinking about policy and the way that the party tries to reconnect with all those voters that they've lost. So that sounds like a set of radical options which he's preparing to set out. And Sir Keir will not have been impressed either with the result from Tees Valley for the mayor there. Let's have a look at these figures, because this is an astounding victory for the Conservatives' Ben Houchen, who's been the mayor. This is again in the northeast of England. We're looking again in the kind of region of Hartlepool and those other seats which went to the Conservatives at the last election. And here we are again. Look at this. It's a huge majority on the first round, straight through, 73% to 27%. Let's see what he's done since he became mayor last time. Let's look at the change. And look at that. You don't really need to say much about that. Up 33% on the last election and 12% down for Labour. And this is the man who's been credited by his supporters with injecting a lot of energy and getting investment in from government and all the rest of it. So That, from the Conservative point of view, is a massive success story and a swing from Labour to the Conservatives of 23%. So the Tees Valley mayor, I mean, that's kind of almost off the scale, isn't it? So, so Ben Houchen re-elected as the Tees Valley mayor. Right, we were hearing there from Keir Starmer, and let's bring in Laura Kuenssberg, who's at Westminster. Laura, what did you make of Sir Keir's message and the kind of way in which he repeatedly said that nothing, no option for him was off the table?
Well, Huw, first, just in terms of the atmospherics of how he came across in that interview, obviously this is a difficult moment for him. I don't think that he hid that in any way, shape or form. You know, he's somebody who's normally very, very composed. He's known for his sort of competence and credibility and having a calm demeanour. I think actually in that interview we could see that these results have not just been a disappointment, but obviously have seemed to be quite a frustration. Now, he said repeatedly that, you know, nothing was off the table. He says the party's got to be bolder, they've got to be stronger, they've got to concentrate less on their internal wranglings and talk more to the public. But when it came to any of the concrete steps, whether it was, is he going to reshuffle his top team in the next few days? What kinds of ideas might he actually be setting out to try to cut through, to get across to people what he believes in? Well, he wasn't really in the mood today to actually answer any of that. And I think whether he likes it or not, well, he might at this stage not be ready to set anything out. There are plenty of people in the Labour movement who already have, you know, whether that's Len McCluskey, the leader of the Unite Union, or whether on the other side of other of those old generals, whether it's Lord Mandelson. And it may well be the case that Keir Starmer actually has to shout quite loudly to get over the debate that is already raging. And, you know, one of his allies was saying to me today, this is the moment where Keir's going to have to take the party by the scruff of the neck. I think at this stage, we don't really know how he's going to set about doing that. Although, as you and I discussed earlier this morning, I think it's pretty likely there will be a Labour reshuffle in the next few days, even though he really didn't want to confirm that today.
Laura, if I go away suddenly, it's because we're getting a declaration from Glasgow Southside, which, of course, is where Nicola, Sturgeon and Anna Sarwar and others are doing battle. Oh, I think it's there, Laura. Let's join it.
As the constituency returning officer for the Glasgow Southside constituency, I hereby give notice that the total number of votes polled for each candidate was as follows. Carol Ann Dobson, Freedom Alliance, Integrity, Society, Economy, 204. Greg, Energy Advisor, 147. Carol Louise Ford, Scottish Liberal Democrats, 504. Jada Franson, Independent, 46. Deke Jackson, the Liberal Party, 102. Anis Sarwar, Scottish Labour Party and Scottish Cooperative Party, 10,279. Nicola Ferguson Sturgeon, Scottish National Party SNP, 19,735. Kyle Thornton, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 1,790. And I declare that Nicola Ferguson Sturgeon is elected to serve in the Scottish Parliament as the member for the Glasgow Southside constituency.
Now we can look at this vote in some detail, but the main thing to say is that Nicola Sturgeon is safely returned.
Thanking you, Returning Officer, and everyone who has worked so hard yesterday to ensure the smooth running of the election, and everybody who has and continues to work very hard here in Glasgow to ensure the smooth administration of the counting. That's always a big job, it's always a tough and difficult job. But this is an election that, just like every other aspect of our lives over this past year, has been conducted in the most challenging and difficult of circumstances. So my thanks to everyone involved from the bottom of my heart, here in Glasgow and indeed right around the country. Let me also take the opportunity to thank my magnificent campaign team. I can't find words adequate to express my gratitude to my election agent, again, Mary Hunter, and to all of my team who have worked tirelessly. It is a challenge for any campaign team when your candidate
is also the party leader and has to spend a significant amount of time in other constituencies. But this team that I am privileged to work with always has my back, always works incredibly hard for me. I love you all and thank you again for everything you do for me and for the SNP. Let me also thank my opponents in this election, particularly Anna Sarwar. Anas and I are opponents, but I think we are in a strange position perhaps in politics of, I think I can speak for him, although he might correct me if I'm wrong here, where we actually quite like each other, and that can make it difficult to campaign against someone, but I congratulate him on his campaign. And thanks above all else to the voters of Glasgow Southside. It is the privilege of my life to represent the most multicultural, diverse constituency in the whole of Scotland. And yesterday, not for the first time, the constituency was targeted by far-right thugs. The far-right thug who led that confrontation got 46 votes, and I am proud that once again Glasgow Southside has shown the racists and the fascists that they are not welcome in Glasgow Southside, they are not welcome in Glasgow, and they are not welcome anywhere in Scotland, and let that be a note of unity. But to my constituents, you do me a great honour in re-electing me to represent you, and I give the commitment today that I have given on each occasion that I have been privileged to be elected to represent the constituency. Whether you voted for me or whether you voted for one of my opponents, I will do everything to represent you to the best of my ability. Now, looking beyond Glasgow Southside to Scotland as a whole, we are in the very, very early stages of a marathon counting operation that will run until probably tomorrow evening. So there's lots of votes, lots of constituencies yet to count before we know the final outcome of this election. But at this stage, I am extremely happy that the SNP appears to be on course for a fourth consecutive election victory and to be on course to have the privilege of forming a government again. And if that is indeed the outcome of this election, I pledge today to get back to work immediately, to continue to steer this country through the crisis of COVID, to lead this country into recovery from COVID, and then, when the time is right, to offer this country the choice of a better future. So for now, thank you very much. Good luck to all candidates who still await the results, and my thanks again to everyone who is working so hard to deliver these election outcomes. Thank you very much indeed.
And now I think we're going to hear from Anna Sarwar, who Nicola Sturgeon said she felt some affection for, and he has certainly added his vote by 8% at the expense of the Conservatives. So there's obviously both a personal vote in this, but also, again, this idea perhaps of tactical voting to make sure that Anna Sarwar is the best person that can actually defend the union. Laura, coming to you now, just on this whole question, as Nicola Sturgeon said, forming her fourth administration, this will take probably, and the SNP majority will give them, probably if it comes, another 5 years. It'll take us to 2026. That will be 19 years of SNP power in Scotland. That is fun for the history books.
It certainly is. You know, for any party to be leading a government for that length of time is somehow suspending what we would normally have seen as sort of political gravity. And we're in a strange period, actually, in terms of that being the case in Scotland. And then also for the whole UK, we're already also at 11 years of Conservative rule. But it was fascinating, though, listening to Nicola Sturgeon there. She didn't use the word independence. She was very clear to say her first job is to get on with leading the country out of the pandemic, to concentrate on recovery, and then, if the time is right, offering the people of Scotland a choice of what she would describe as a better future. And that's a bit like the way that she's campaigned, almost trying to not mention the possibility of an independence referendum. But she was also careful there to remind people, and also to remind our viewers, there's a long way still to go. And I know you and Nick have been talking so much this afternoon about the clues as to just how far down the line the SNP will get towards what they would see as the sort of magic mandate. But there's been no question really through this campaign of her returning as First Minister. The question is, with what level of support behind her?
Yes, and as you say, we're starting to see that a bit more clearly. But it may be, of course, coming out of the pandemic and going to the recovery, she absolutely still remains in charge of that. But if there's a couple of other big beasts come into the Scottish Parliament, for example, Angus Robertson in Edinburgh Central, they will be the ones that will actually lead that argument forward for that second independence referendum, leaving her to the job of recovery of bringing back the country to some kind of economic stability.
Yeah, that may well be the case, Kirsty, and even if actually in the end the seat makeup might not be that different, and as we say, it's early stages, we don't know what that jigsaw would actually look like in the end. Even if the ultimate numbers don't look that different to the last set of results, the complexion of the Parliament will still change, the characters involved will still change. We see, you know, the new Labour leader Anna Sarwar there, you know, nowhere near taking away Nicola Sturgeon's majority, but, you know, nibbling away, increasing the Labour share, a new voice in Holyrood. Equally, as you say, some SNP big beasts probably back in the Parliament. Still unresolved the question of what will happen with Alba, Alex Salmond's breakaway party that believes in the cause of independence. What will his role in the aftermath of all of this be, if indeed he manages to make any inroads? But I just wondered, there's an interesting sort of parallel here with what we now see happening in England in a sense. You know, that SNP dominance you were reminding us of in Scotland has been so total for such a long time. And a lot of people would suggest that really came to pass because Labour was complacent. They basically relied on their vote there for far too long, didn't knock on doors anymore, took voters for granted, and its vote rotted away. There are some parallels, perhaps a decade or so behind, with what we now see happening in parts of England, where Labour perhaps took this vote for granted, and Conservative candidates, like in that astounding win for Ben Houchen in Teesside, saw an opportunity, seized it, built an organisation on the ground, and are now reaping the rewards in very big ways.
Laura, thanks.
Well, Laura there mentioned Ben Houchen, the newly re-elected mayor for the Tees Valley, and as if by magic we can make contact with him straight away. Ben, many congratulations and thank you very much for joining us.
No, pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
OK, your result is, to say the least, impressive because there was a huge swing. You put on a lot of support on last time. You sailed through on the first round with a majority of over 76,000. Let's help the viewers. In your words, for those viewers who are not familiar with Tees Valley, they're not familiar with what you've done, they're not familiar with the debate around mayors and all the rest of it, what's led to this today?
Well, what's led to it is years and years of neglect, and I'd say that point that we've had in the places like Teesside, Darlington and Hartlepool. Governments of both colours have failed to invest in our region, and under this government with Boris Johnson, we've seen huge investment come into the region. We've seen the new Treasury North moving to Darlington. We've seen the UK's largest free port established on the River Tees. We've seen the airport saved and is actually doing fantastically well. We're investing in public infrastructure, public transport, and what people are seeing tangible benefits on the ground. And the things that I think have returned us today is the fact that Teesside is absolutely delivering on the levelling up agenda. We're taking responsibility ourselves, we're delivering a lot of that ourselves, and having the support of a government that believes in levelling up has just made it so much easier to be able to help the people of Teesside, Darlington and Hartlepool. So, you know, there's still a long way to go. We're an area that has been neglected for a long time and it's not going to be solved in a few years. But my pitch to people was the big pieces that we've put in place, like the Treasury, like the free port, like the public infrastructure, whether it's the airport or other things. You know, these things are moving us in the right direction, and they will create opportunities and jobs in a region that sorely needs and deserves them. And people have got on board with that, and they realise it's going to take many, many years to continue to turn that around. But people, they want jobs, they want opportunities, and they want to be proud of where they live. Teesside, Darlington, Hartlepool is an amazing place. The Tees Valley is a fantastic place to live and have a career, and we need to be more proud of that. Now, historically, certainly lots of commentators in London have often looked at the North East, and in particular places like Teesside, as some sort of post-industrial wasteland. And it's not. It's a fantastic place full of working families, and it's a wonderful place to be. And I think there is a pride returning, and starting to deliver results is part of it, but there's still a long way to go.
You know what your opponents say, or at least some of them. They say you're a Conservative mayor who's been showered with cash by a Conservative government. And, if you weren't a Conservative mayor, that wouldn't have happened. And they think that is, frankly, not the right way to manage government and manage government finances. What's your answer to that?
Well, it's also not true. I mean, we've got Labour mayors in the North West who have money available to them and powers available to them in the same way that I do. I'm confident that we've achieved more with the money that we have available to us than they have in the North West. People are seeing real, tangible benefits. And I don't buy into this, what I think is frankly a bizarre argument, that this Conservative government stood on a mandate of levelling up. We said that if you vote for us, we're going to level up parts of the country that have been neglected for a long, long time. You know what? The voters bought into that. They elected new Tory MPs for the first time in areas like Redcar. We've obviously had the fantastic result last night in Hartlepool. And, people want that opportunity. So now the government are delivering on their promises of levelling up these areas, and the Labour Party are bashing the government, saying, why are you investing in these areas? It's pork barrel politics. It's nonsense. This is a government delivering on its levelling up agenda, and Teesside, Darlington and Hartlepool is the perfect example of that levelling up agenda.
Ben Houchen, Kirsty here in Edinburgh. I'm racking my brains. I can't actually think of a bigger personal mandate in British politics. Can you?
I don't know. It's not something that particularly interests me. I was very concentrated on trying to continue with the progress that we've started. There's still, like I say, a huge way to go. I'm just pleased. I would have been very pleased if I'd won by one vote, because there's a lot of work to do. I'm very proud of what we've started, and I want to go a lot further with it.
Well, go a lot further, but imagine 3 years' time. Do you think you might actually consider entering Parliament in 2024? You're just the kind of person, presumably, the Conservatives would like to see on those benches.
I have no idea. I mean, you'll have to speak to the Conservative Party or, whoever you want to speak to about whether they think I'm a good candidate.
I'm going to have to interrupt you. Just as you're speaking, we have to go straight over to East Fife.
The electorate was 59,596. 40,415 ballot papers were verified, giving a turnout of 67.81%. 159 ballot papers were rejected. I, Morag Ferguson, Deputy Constituency Returning Officer, give notice that the total number of votes cast for each candidate in the election was as follows. Fleming, Rory, Scottish National Party, 14,715. Haynes, Wendy, Helena, Scottish Labour Party, 1,056. Metcalfe, Rona, Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, 2,323. Rennie, Willie, Scottish Liberal Democrats, 22,163. I declare Willie Rennie to be elected to serve in the Scottish Parliament as a member for the North East Fife constituency. Thank you.
Next. There we have Willie Rennie, the Liberal Democrat leader, returned safely in North East Fife, a seat that the SNP took in 2011. And we can run through the statistics on that. Looking at the share of the vote, we can see now that, the Liberal Democrats put on 11% in their vote. The SNP put on 3%. And the Conservatives dropped 11 and Labour dropped 3. So SNP to Liberal Democrat, 4.2%. That, again, might be a personal rating for Willie Rennie and the job he's done at the Liberal Democrats. Let me just bring in Nick early on that. Nick.
It's a tactical vote again, isn't it? The vote has gone from the Conservative voters to the person that was most likely to hold the seat over the SNP. But just one other thing that's worth picking up on at this stage is in the seats where it really matters, the SNP at the moment seem to be doing well. East Lothian winning it. Caithness, which the Lib Dems earlier this week thought they were going to take, they've held on to it.
Right, well, listen, I'll come back to you in a moment, but we can speak now to Anna Sarwar, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party. Anna Sarwar, good afternoon. You had a vote of confidence, at least in personal terms, by Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah, that was interesting. It's good to be able to disagree in politics but not dislike but I think you can see from the share of the vote that we are pleased with the progress we're making to double the actual number of votes, but also to increase the share of the vote by almost 50% from the last election is of course great, very much to be welcomed.
And of course, you took it at the expense of the Conservative vote, which is we're seeing in different Scottish constituencies that the second vote is going to the party which can be seen to be more effectively prosecuting the case for the union. That was very much not your main agenda for this election, because you were looking at building back better, you were looking at protecting the NHS, you were looking at a new national care home system and so forth. You weren't necessarily focused on the union, which makes me want to ask you, what will you do in the event of an SNP majority putting the case for a second independence referendum? Which way will you flip? Will you back Nicola Sturgeon on this, or will you back Boris Johnson?
Well, first of all, we've not had the results yet, so let's have the results over the course of today and tomorrow. I made my case pretty clear through the election campaign that we don't support independence, we don't support a referendum, and you're right to mention things like education and the NHS and other issues, because I want us to focus on that national recovery. And so my plea to all political parties, they said during this campaign that they were going to focus in the next Parliament, particularly at the start of this next Parliament, on the national recovery. Let's start that work right now and immediately. It's also important to say that, you know, where we were 10 weeks ago when I took over this job and where we are now is an incredible transformation, and that's down to all the hard work and efforts of people across the country. I think people can see that there is a new energy and a new enthusiasm around the Labour Party. I'm not pretending that process of change though is complete though. We are on a journey, very much on a journey, and what I want to build is not the opposition to the SNP. What we want to build is the alternative to the SNP, and that journey continues.
So, do you have any advice for Keir Starmer, who's looking very disgruntled this afternoon?
Well, look, what I'd say is, look, there are lessons that actually the UK Labour Party can learn from the Scottish Labour Party about what happened to us after a big constitutional binary choice and the challenges that we face. And what I'm doing and what Keir is doing is taking the party on a journey. And I want us to do it with energy. I want us to do it with optimism. I want to do it with honesty, also with humility and authenticity. And I think if we do that, we can persuade people across the country that the Labour Party is very much on their side. I think people have seen that in Scotland over the last 10 weeks. We're not the angry Labour Party that wants to fight with everybody. Instead, we want to pull this country back together and focus on the national recovery. And I'm making that open plea right now. Is every political party spoke about the national recovery. We aren't out this crisis yet. So when we get into the Parliament on that first day, let's start the important work of rebuilding this country we all love.
Anna Sarwar, thank you very much indeed.
Let's take a look then at the local authorities in England, update our knowledge there, because we've had more councillors elected, 4,500 councillors being elected in this set of elections across England. And there we have the scoreboard so far. We have the Conservatives up 95. Labour have lost 121 councillors so far. Lib Dems up 5. The Greens up 16. We saw some encouraging results for the Greens in Cambridgeshire and in Sheffield. So let me bring in Caroline Lucas of the Green Party. She's in Brighton. Caroline, thanks for waiting patiently. Yes, can we talk about Sheffield? What led to that?
Well, I think we already had a very strong Green presence on Sheffield City Council, and people like what they were doing. They were absolutely standing up for their principles, for example, over the famous issue of protecting street trees, but they were also prioritising things like affordable housing, better planning rules. And basically what we're seeing around the country is that when you have councils that have some Greens elected, then people like what they see and they elect more. So what we've seen in Sheffield is gaining 5 more seats. We've included taking out the Labour leader of Sheffield City Council. Sheffield will now be no overall control, and so we look forward to having greater influence on that council. And I think what you're seeing around the country as a whole is that there is nowhere where Greens are not winning seats. We've made breakthroughs into our first seats in places like Stockport, Northumberland, where we won 2 seats from the Tories, Hastings, Derbyshire, the list goes on. So it's no longer the case that Greens, if it ever was, the case that Greens are winning only in places like Brighton and Bristol. We are winning all around the country because people like the practical vision that we are bringing to our politics, the way that we listen to local people, we take nothing for granted, and we make sure that we're putting in place bold, ambitious policies for a greener and fairer community.
I mentioned you were up 16 already, and I'm just wondering, given that we're still, at a relatively early stage, 111 councils in England yet to declare, so clearly there's a long way to go. Do you expect that number of gains to increase significantly, or what?
Well, we are expecting some more significant gains. Yes, you're absolutely right. We're also hoping for a strong showing in London, and we know that Sean Berry, for example, our mayoral candidate, according to some polls, has been in third place there. Increasingly, I think we are being seen as the third party in British politics. We're hoping that we might make a first breakthrough in Wales as well. So this feels like there is a green spring happening. There are green shoots going all around the country. And essentially, I think people want to go for a party that has a vision, that has, a set of plans about how we would set up stronger, more empowered communities, more communities that are in greener spaces where fairness is absolutely ingrained in all of those policies. And that's what the Greens are offering.
Well, Caroline, we'll see where we are by the end of the weekend. Thanks very much. There's some way to go, as we know, but thanks very much for joining us.
And we can get an update on the news and the weather now, and I'd like to know whether or not the rain coming down my back is going to continue, so we hand over now to Jane Hill.
Kirsty, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Weather coming up in a few minutes with someone more qualified than me. Let's start, though, with a summary of all today's main stories. The Prime Minister has thanked the people of Hartlepool for placing their trust in the Conservative Party after the Tories took the parliamentary seat in what's being described as a shattering result for Labour. The new MP is Jill Mortimer, the first Conservative to represent the area since the constituency was created in 1974.
Well, I just wanted to say a massive thank you first of all, to the people of Hartlepool for placing their confidence in us, in the Conservatives. I want to congratulate Jill on a fantastic campaign. I think that she's been a wonderful candidate and fought very, very hard for every vote, and I think she'll be a wonderful MP. And for me, what this means is that I think that it's a mandate for us to continue to deliver, for not just for the people of Hartlepool, not just for the people of the North East, but across the whole of the country.
Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is now facing a backlash within the party after that loss of Hartlepool.
I take full responsibility for the results, and I will take full responsibility for fixing things. We have changed as a party, but we haven't set out a strong enough case to the country. Very often we've been talking to ourselves instead of to the country, and we've lost the trust of working people, particularly in places like Hartlepool. I intend to do whatever is necessary to fix that.
So Keir Starmer. Results are coming in for the Scottish parliamentary election. In the last half an hour or so, the SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon has retained her seat in Glasgow Southside. So far, her party has won 17 seats, gaining 1 East Lothian from Labour. The Liberal Democrats have 3 seats. The final results for all 129 seats at Holyrood are expected tomorrow. There have been a handful of results in the elections in Wales to the Senedd. The Conservatives have 2 seats, including gaining the Vale of Clywd. Labour has 1 seat. The full results are expected this evening. And in the news away from the elections, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation has recommended that people under the age of 40 should be offered an alternative vaccine to the AstraZeneca jab after concerns about blood clots. The age threshold is being raised from the original 30 as a precautionary measure. We will find out in the next half an hour how international travel will restart for England. Holidays abroad are currently banned, but a traffic-like system of rules will take effect on the 17th of May, with countries classed as green, amber or red. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, is due to give a full news briefing at 5 o'clock this evening, and we will bring you that live. You can follow that news statement live on the BBC News channel. Police searching for the killer of Julia James, the police community support officer who was found dead near her home in Kent 10 days ago, have released a photograph of a man they would like to speak to. Officers say this man is understood to have been in the Houchen area on the 28th of April, the day after Julia James was murdered. Police are appealing for the man or anyone who recognises him to contact them. And now, as promised, that takes us to a look at the day's weather prospects. They come from Nick Miller.
Hello, warmer weather on the way this weekend, but don't be fooled into thinking that means a lot of sunshine. There will not be. In fact, a very wet start to the weekend, as we'll see in a moment. Today, it's sunny spells, scattered showers, the heaviest downpours eastern Scotland, northeast England, north and east Yorkshire into Lincolnshire, some thundery with hail. The driest weather, the higher temperatures in South Wales and southern England. But here it will turn wet as we go into tonight. The rain moving in across southern England into Wales and Northern Ireland. Under the clear skies ahead of that in Scotland, northern and eastern parts of England, another frost setting in before temperatures creep up later in the night. So tomorrow, some really quite heavy rain, difficult driving conditions spreading north across the UK, clearing from Northern Ireland in the afternoon as it turns drier and brighter, drying up a bit in southern Scotland as it will in southeast England and East Anglia, but still raining in northern England and Wales into the afternoon. These average wind speeds will be gusts around 30 to 40 miles an hour, so it's a windier day. It's a warmer day for many, but another cold one in Scotland.